Welcome everybody to another episode of Charlescast, where we tackle complex political, economic, and social issues within 10 minutes or less. So without further ado, let's get down to business. So today, we'll be talking about why do white people call the police on black people? Admittedly, that was as hard to say as it is to write. I mean, why do white people call the police on black people? This issue made national headlines when on April 12th, two black men, Rashawn Nelson and Dante Robinson, walked into a Philadelphia-based Starbucks to have a meeting about real estate. Not more than 2 minutes later, they were confronted by the store manager, who was white, who insisted they buy something or leave. In response, the men replied that they were waiting for a friend. However, to their dismay, and to the protest of both white and black onlookers, the men were promptly handcuffed and arrested by officers called by that store manager. After an initial backlash of protests and outrage and a temporary boycott of Starbucks, the Starbucks CEO and my personal alumnus, Howard Schultz, promptly apologized to the men and set up a $200,000 grant to teach entrepreneurship in area high schools. Starbucks corporate also shut down every single branch in the United States to teach racial awareness training. After initially doubling down and defending the actions of the arresting officers, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Richard Ross apologized. And after coming to an agreement, the city of Philadelphia and the men both settled for $1 apiece in order to raise awareness for this issue. During the entire ordeal, both men expressed extraordinary candor, restraint, and professionalism, so kudos to Rashawn and Dante. Now, following this initial story, there was a torrent of incidents that made national headlines. First, there was Jennifer Schultz, emphatically dubbed Barbecue Becky. Now, Barbecue Becky's an environmental scientist at Stanford University who called the police on Michelle Snyder and Kenzie Smith for barbecuing at an Oakland park that allowed barbecuing. After the police did nothing, the incident went viral and Barbecue Becky was roasted on social media. The roast was so severe that barbecuing while black became the trending topic on Twitter, and the black community held a massive barbecue at Lake Merrick. And Barbecue Becky was credited for single-handedly revitalizing the entire area. Then there was Allison Edel, who was later dubbed Hermit Patty. In early June, Hermit Patty was caught on camera confronting an 8-year-old selling water near AT&T Park in San Francisco. Let that sink in. She called the police on an 8-year-old girl for selling water. The irony here is that she works for a marijuana edibles company who didn't have all their paperwork together to conduct business. After the roast, she resigned from her post as CEO. Oh, you like that little rhyme there? Roast, post, CEO? Okay, let me stop. Sadly, some of these confrontations actually became a little violent. In late June, near Somerville, South Carolina, there was Stephanie Sebi Strimple. Did I say that right? Stephanie Sebi Strimple. Sounds like a bad guy. Stephanie won the mantle of Pool Patrol Paula. Pool Patrol Paula assaulted and used racial slurs against a 15-year-old black boy when he attempted to use the public pool. She was promptly arrested and publicly shamed, also fired from her affiliation with skincare company Rodan and Fields. To be fair, she didn't quite call the police on the boy, but she did assault him, yell at him, and he actually left in fear. If he had stayed and possibly fought her, he probably would be in jail today, unfortunately. And then there was Pool Patrol Paul, or by his government name, Adam Bloom, who called the police on a black woman and her child for failing to show ID at a private pool. After determining she was a resident with a card, he continued to harass the woman. After being socially shamed and fired from his position at Sunoco, Pool Patrol Paul is now looking for another job. And just last week, on August 2nd, in Massachusetts, Smith College, Omu Kunute, an African woman who was working for the school STEM program, teaching chemistry at local high schools, was eating in the dining hall when she was approached by an unnamed employee and on-campus police, and she was told she looked out of place. After an awkward back and forth with campus police was uploaded to social media, they determined that the complaint was totally unfounded and unwarranted. This story bore an eerie resemblance to the incident at Yale where Sarah Brosh, a graduate student, confronted and called police on an African undergrad, Lolade Sianbola, for sleeping in the common area in the college's dorm room. A second student, Renaissance Jean-Louis, was also told that he doesn't belong here by Sarah Brosh earlier that year. Here's something else about Sarah. She's upfront about her support for hate speech and legislation limiting the rights of minorities. Now, what's really scary about these situations is that they happen every day. It's not a spurious occurrence. The only difference in 2018 is that everyone has a camera and the internet to broadcast these humiliating, dehumanizing interactions that many African Americans have to deal with on a daily basis. In terms of analyses, we must look at some of the similarities that are common threads in these situations. Well, what are some common denominators here? Number one, all of these situations involve police being called on black youth under the age of 25. Number two, many of these incidents took place on a college campus or institute of higher learning. Number three, the overwhelming majority of these attacks were committed by white women. Number four, most of these incidents took place in what some would call a Democratic stronghold. Number five, most of the victims were told in one way or another that they do not belong here. There should be no mistake or argument that these attacks are in some shape or form racially motivated. Now, armed with this information, we can create a profile to get down to the root of the problem. With the metrics we have available, we can create a profile that was as much of a shock to me as it might be to you. According to the information available, the accusers have overwhelmingly been from Democratic enclaves, white, females with higher education, primarily targeting children, black children. At first glance, the intersectional bigotry was a shock to me. I mean, why are educated Caucasian women from a Democratic state leading in these kinds of attacks? Since the Civil Rights Act of 1875, it has been illegal to prohibit African Americans from public accommodations. However, in 1892's Plessy v. Ferguson case, the Supreme Court ruled that racially segregated schools, pools, and transportation were permissible as long as they were equal in quality. This is where the doctrine of separate but equal came from. This legislation gave rise to the Jim Crow era, where public accommodations in the North and the South were segregated along racial lines. It wasn't until Brown v. Board of Education and several cases spearheaded by the legendary Thurgood Marshall that the Jim Crow era prohibitions were finally abolished. When you look at the history, it's clear to see that the same people who were proponents of segregation a generation ago are the same people who practice it today. These people didn't die out, they integrated. Instead of wearing hoods and swastikas, they put on a disguise. Some as Democrats, some as Republicans, still preaching and practicing the same bigotry from 100 years ago. I don't want to get into the sordid history of segregation in the United States. Whether you were in the North or South, desegregation was met with fierce resistance from the public, and that same sentiment continues on to this very day. I feel especially singed by the Democrats. You know, they purport themselves as the party who is diverse and multicultural, but being raised in New York, I was met with many instances of what I'd like to call microaggressions, and I've hit the glass ceiling more times than I care to share from the same people who listen to the rap music that I enjoy. Over the years, the diversity-rich, democratic metropolis that is New York City has won the unfortunate title of having one of the most segregated school systems in the United States. A deplorable statistic that's an embarrassment to the diversity awards and accolades that the city shamelessly lambasts itself with. Thankfully, Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo has vowed to undo the systems that has limited the educational resources for African Americans and other minorities in the New York City area. Although we have come a long way, in 2018, we still have some ways to go, and there's no shame in that. Thanks, and God bless everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this content, please subscribe and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. To support this content, my Patreon link is at the bottom. Thanks, and God bless.